And it's tragic when you get some kid who may be afraid to get on a plane and says, hey, let me go get a Xanax, maybe never took a pill before in their life. And then they pop one and, thinking it's going to calm them down for a flight or, help them get, uh, over some stress for some other reason, and they never wake up again.
I'm Flindt Anderson, founder of PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need. I've been in recovery since 2001, and there isn't much I don't know about recovery. And my mission is to constantly tell the truth about addiction, to make the realities of addiction, recovery, and drug culture known, and to drive awareness and advocate change that ultimately saves lives.
And I'm Jason LaChance, a certified recovery coach with a passion for speaking with others and sharing their knowledge to help others seek recovery and maintain long-term sobriety. And this is the Don't Hide the Scars podcast, presented by PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need. Peter Forcelli, author of The Deadly Path, How Operation Fast and Furious and Bad Lawmakers Armed Mexican Cartels. Thank you for joining the founder of PAIN, Flindt Anderson, and myself, Jason LaChance, on Don't Hide the Scars.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Honored to be here.
You got it, Peter. We're glad you're here, man. We really are. This is going to be good.
Yeah, I think it's interesting just to dig in first, about Operation Fast and Furious, because before we hit record, you said, you don't see working in public safety. I mean, goodness, you had a 30-year career?
35, actually, between two different, 15 years with NYPD and then a little over 20 with ATF.
Okay. Yeah. We love New York cops, by the way.
We do. We absolutely love them. Absolutely love them.
Everyone we've spoken with or met in person, it has always been an honor. But it was really, this is such a wonderful book, and I've been digging through it. But what made you decide that this needed to be put out? Because Flindt and I, our conversations really surround public safety, especially with the fentanyl crisis. I mean, that's our initiative, what we do, and helping people and families of the suffering addicts. What was the point you said, I just can't stay quiet on this?
Well, a couple things, actually. One of which was, look, at the end of my career, I was the head of training for ATF, which was great. By that time I was ground down and just tired of the job, frankly. And so part of my responsibility was training new agents. So 1 week out of every month for roughly 3.5, almost 4 years, I'd have to go down to Brunswick, Georgia, which is where ATF's academy is. And I would speak to the new agents. And every now and then, most people are just happy to have a job, but every now and then somebody would start researching the organization, and, they would hear my name, and, they would have heard about Fast and Furious, and it would be like, hey, what really happened there? And then every now and then I'd even hear from agents that worked in other parts of the United States who would ask me the same question, and what happened was, when we would advocate, hey, why don't we talk about this so it never happens again? Because the old adage, he who doesn't know about history is bound to repeat it, right? We were always told, no, we don't talk about Fast and Furious. It's like Fight Club. You don't talk about Fight Club, which I thought was asinine. Because, like I said, you had people that were with ATF during that period who worked in, the other corners of the United States who heard about it, but never really knew what happened down there. And it was important to know because, look, a lot of it was just abandoning the basics of policing. And if you guys were reading the book, you saw that. But a lot of it was also, it wasn't on the agents. I mean, a lot of it was, but a lot of it was because of the decisions made by prosecutors. So I wanted folks to know that. And then another factor was Brian Terry was the Border Patrol agent that was killed with one of the guns that was smuggled during Operation Fast and Furious. And I wasn't involved in that case, the operation. I was in a group that was there before Fast and Furious even started. So I saw what was happening. But I met his mother when I testified in front of Congress, and she was a wonderful woman, very kind. And she just wanted to know, what happened. And the government never told her. And, I've since then, I've got to meet his cousin. I met Brian's, his brother, Kent, has had some phone conversations with him, his two sisters. They're wonderful people, just like people that you'd want as your next door neighbors, just kind, good-hearted folks. And they never got answers. So I wanted them to know what I knew, which, again, I know it's not going to answer all their questions, but I just, for those two reasons, between, educating the agents and giving the Terry family at least some idea of what led to Operation Fast and Furious, those were my motivators, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to really let people know what it is, I mean, the operation, it's kind of mind blowing as some of the things that you guys do. We won't cover all of that stuff because we'll get into other things. But it's named Fast and Furious because it has to do with the smuggling across the borders of cars that, normally would have been in the Fast and Furious movies, imports, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, right. Yeah, no, the case itself that wasn't named Operation Fast and Furious. That's a nickname that was given to it by the agents that worked on the case. The name of the case was Jacob Chambers and others. Et al. Is the abbreviation they used.
Right.
But they called it Fast and Furious, yeah, because as you just pointed out, the straw purchasers, the people who were buying the guns for the cartels that ATF wasn't interdicting, they were driving those souped up Japanese cars, and that's where the nickname came from. But yeah, it's just a really dark time in the history of my former organization.
Well, how do you view a lot of, Flindt does a lot with legislators here in the state to try to harsher penalties for fentanyl dealers and everything else. But I mean, you saw it really firsthand, like you said, the gentleman that was a border agent that got killed in this case.
Yeah. Look, I think that people who push fentanyl should be strictly punished. I mean, look, people are dying more so than we lost in Vietnam, more so than we lost in other wars. I mean, right. I honestly think that the Chinese government is doing this on purpose. I sat through it. I sat through training back in 2015 at the Army War College. I was a civilian. I was allowed to attend this training, which was a great honor to be surrounded by all these Army officers about to be generals and whatnot. And they talked about the Chinese have a 100-year plan, right, yeah, to surpass the United States as the world superpower. Don't forget, they were also the victims of something similar back in the days of the Opium Wars. Where,
that's exactly right.
Yep. So, I mean, again, going back to learning from history, right, that we just talked about. So clearly, I think what they're doing is they're working with the Mexican cartels. My understanding is there are Chinese nationals who are actually physically in Mexico working with the cartels on this. And they know that these things are coming here. And it's tragic when you get some kid who may be afraid to get on a plane and say, let me go get a Xanax, maybe never took a pill before in their life. And then they pop one and, thinking it's going to calm them down for a flight or, help them get, over some stress for some other reason, and they never wake up again. And then, of course, you have people who misuse drugs, who have problems, right? That's something that a lot of families deal with. I recently was at the Lost Voices of Fentanyl rally to support a friend of mine, a DEA agent named Derek Maltz, who does a lot for those who lost relatives to fentanyl. So I went there to support him and got to meet some amazing folks who just dealt with a ton of tragedy in their lives. And look, some of their family members or kids were drug addicts who just were fighting the demon that they fight. And it's an illness. I get that. And then some were exactly what I just described. People who didn't necessarily have a drug problem, but popped a pill for one reason or another, and they're gone. So I mean, the fact that our government is doing more really bothers me. I mean, they have all these knee-jerk reactions over so many other things. Now they're talking about banning mentholated cigarettes, for example.
Right.
How about putting some effort into saving some lives? Because this is too much, man. Look, I don't think of it as overdosing as much as I think of it as poisoning. They're being poisoned.
Yeah. Well, Peter, it's interesting you say that because, I've worked with law enforcement a little bit here, and I've worked with a couple folks with DEA, and the interesting fact here, and what I'm trying to get across to our law enforcement people, anywhere from again, boots on the ground to prosecutors, is there are, in my opinion, right now, very far and few between accidental overdoses anymore. We in this country have done an amazing job of putting the awareness piece out there. All the different campaigns around the country and all the different counties of, one pill can kill, and, on and on and on. And I do know this for a fact that some agencies, their phone calls are down now, in respect to overdoses, because again, our society has promoted the use of Narcan, which is a wonderful thing to do. We do it here. It's one of our big initiatives. But Narcan is a Band-Aid. That's all it is. When you're talking about addiction, that Narcan is a life-saving tool, period. Case closed. Because what Narcan does is it wipes out the opioid in your system. When you're in an overdose, it removes the opioid. So you have to ask yourself the next question, what does that do? Well, it throws everybody into immediate withdrawal symptoms again. So we've literally had people run out of the hospital to go to the dealer one more time to use. I'm a recovering opiate addict. There is not much I don't know about this. In fact, I've just been invited this morning up to the DEA deal that's going to go on in Sacramento on June 6th, talking about this and dealing with families. You know, because again, a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, yes, that accidental poisoning was there. You hit the nail on the head. The kid that just wanted to have a Xanax, the kid that just wanted to go buy a Percocet and thought it was the real deal, you know, and they wind up dead in 3 minutes. When you become a fentanyl addict, that is now the drug you have to have in your body in order to not get dope sick, in order to, if you even want to consider it functioning, that's what you have to have every day in order to not go into full-blown withdrawals and on and on and on. So, and you're right, China has had this plan for however how long. They're surgical about it, all right? And what we're not talking about now is the treatment side of it. What is the solution? We can give all the Band-Aids in the world. We can give fentanyl test strips. By the way, a fentanyl test strip, there's not one opiate addict out there, including myself in my day, that is going to go through a 3-step process, waste the time on and get rid of a drug to test it, because that's the drug we have to have in our body. Okay. Right. So we have to be able to start giving solutions here to this problem. And our treatment industry in the United States is about as effed up as it's ever been, because we're not providing enough beds for those people that need it. A lot of addicts want the help. They can't get it. They don't know where to go. Right. Yeah. You know, and now I know that there are people in law enforcement, at least in our area, that are starting to understand that process. Okay, because that's the next step that we have to take in this thing. But it's like anything else. When you're fighting the dragon, you don't start by cutting off the tail. You start by cutting off the head. Right. And we haven't even gone after the head on this dragon at all.
No, we're afraid. Look, they're afraid to have difficult decisions with China. And let's be honest, they're afraid to do what they need to do with the cartels. The current president of Mexico, Obrador, is very soft on the cartels. His predecessor wasn't as soft as he is. And look, you know, I hate to get into the politics of things.
I got it.
But the reality is there's no denying that our border is porous, right? You can't have it both ways, right? If it's not porous, then how can you explain all the opioids and all the other stuff that's coming into the country that shouldn't be coming here? Right. Look, the stuff happening in Mexico right now rivals the stuff that was happening in the Middle East. When I talk about the lack of humanity, beheadings, mass graves, kidnappings, tortures, people being skinned alive, literally. I've seen the images of the bodies after they're found, skinned,
Right.
It's terrorism, but yet we won't call them terrorists because we don't want to offend our neighbor to the south, but we're not dealing with them appropriately. And look, DEA, which, does what they can do with their resources. They had a pretty robust presence in Mexico. They had good intelligence networks down there. They had vetted units who were, soldiers who were polygraphed, who they could trust, because trust is something that's hard to find in some parts of Mexico, right? Yep. Well, Obrador put an end to most of that. So, and look, to be honest, people in our administration aren't really pushing back.
Right.
So, until we get our act together, people are going to continue to die. But you're absolutely correct. We're not going after the head. We don't want to offend. And the end result, unfortunately, is losing some bright lives.
Yes.
Because regardless of what people are struggling with now, right? I mean, first off, they deserve to live. Secondly, some people who were dealing with drug addiction descend into a really bad place, and we hope that never happens. But there are others who recover and go on and lead very functional lives. And look, there are some people who do that balance where they struggle with it, but they still can manage to lead a productive life. They're not necessarily in a position where that they're just dysfunctional because they constantly need, to use something. It's just tragic to see some of our brightest taken from us, and the government focused on just so many unimportant things and not as focused on this as they should be. But look, I'm glad that law enforcement in many parts of the country are becoming aware. I'll be honest, when I was a newer cop, I didn't realize, that drug addiction was an illness. I thought,
right.
that it was something that folks wanted to do, So, I mean, it's good that the awareness is being spread, and it's good that we're having these conversations.
Absolutely.
New Perceptions North, the premier drug and alcohol treatment and recovery center in Central California. A full continuum of medically supervised top quality care with programs for detox and patient residential treatment with dual diagnosis, intensive outpatient treatment, sober living support groups, and more. New Perceptions North provides adult men and women with the highest caliber of professional health care, treating each client with compassion and respect in a safe, comfortable environment to begin the process of recovery to proudly create and sustain a life without addiction. Call 559-978-1507 or visit newperceptionsnorth.com.
And what I try to tell people out there, as in regards to law enforcement, is that these men and women are doing everything that they can, okay, with the tools that they have. When they stop a car or a truck and it's got 350,000 fentanyl pills in it, which is such a minute number to begin with, compared to what's actually coming over the border, people will go, oh God, you know what? I mean, really, that's it. Look, they're saving some life that day.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
They're saving somebody's life. Maybe it's one person, maybe it's 30 people. I don't know, but they're saving life that day. So I don't like people going out there, well, we're not doing enough. Well, look, their hands are tied to a certain degree, and right. And lack of agents, lack of resources, whatever the case may be, because it always comes back to the federal government and what the hell they're doing. And right now they're doing nothing.
No, and well, let's take it one step further. Right, I look at the cartels in this as kind of the middleman. Right, China's driving this. They're sending precursors there. The cartels are making a ton of money. But I wrote the book on Operation Fast and Furious. That happened in 2012 is when I left Arizona, because after I testified, how much use for me in that state, I kind of got thrown out. Right, but I saw what the cartels were doing down there. Right, that's 12 years ago. So we knew then how big the cartels were, how powerful they were, how violent they were. Well, they're much stronger now. They're better armed. They're much, much wealthier. They've expanded humans. They're making more money smuggling humans than they are smuggling drugs right now. And to your point, what's the government doing? We turn a blind eye to much of this. We're certainly worried about what's happening in other countries. And, again, going into politics, look, I don't want to see the Russians take over Ukraine, right? I don't like what's going on in the Middle East. There's conflict in other parts of the world as well. And I get it. We have to have some opinions and we have to do what we have to do to support those countries. But how about we fix problems here first?
Right here.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. We have to be involved in these things because they don't want things to come to our doorstep. But hey, why don't you deal with what's already in your house? Screw the doorstep. How about what's already in your house, right?
Right.
Yeah.
No, and when we get up to Sacramento, and we've had parents that have lost kids to this thing or other family members to it, and the general response from politicians, at least in California, at the public health and safety committees, is basically this: oh, Miss So and So, we grieve with you. We are so sorry for your loss. But is it really going to do any good to put that person in jail now? That's exactly what they told this one lady. And it's like, why didn't you just walk up and hit her with a 2x4 in the back of the head?
Because they have no empathy. They're not aware. Well, I'll tell you a funny story. While I worked in Arizona, one of the things I first wound up doing when I was out there was setting up this violent crime impact team in the city of Mesa. Right, because Mesa was dealing with a spike in crime, and these violent crime impact teams, they were designed to go out there and go after what the police departments would describe as their worst of the worst, right? The ones who would keep getting put in state jail, get out, reoffend, the folks who just took advantage of the revolving doors of justice. So in order to do this, and I was a federal agent, to do this in the city, you need the buy-in of the police chief of that city. Well, the police chief in Mesa at the time was George Gascon. Right, the Los Angeles County District Attorney was. All right, so I had to get the buy-in of the chief. I did. He signed off on the document. I would meet with him. I wouldn't say weekly, but sometimes once a week, sometimes every other week. But I met with him and we would talk about the events of the previous week, like who was arrested, the foot chases. And here was the guy who's like, oh, yeah, like he was all in. Like he seemed to enjoy police work and to hear that bad people were getting locked up. So, he left. Well, I left Arizona. He left the Mesa Police Department. I'd never been in contact with him since then. And then I see him as the San Francisco district attorney for a while. And he was very, soft on crime there. And now I guess he's taking it up a notch in Los Angeles. And I'm like, I sit here and say, what happened to this guy?
Right.
What point did you give up your values? Or, I mean, like, what does it take to change you from someone who seems to get it to become all of a sudden someone who's so soft on crime? You wonder, was it money? Or did he have some sort of epiphany? Did he lose his mind? But yeah, I mean, talk about a funny story. It's based that you guys are there in California. You got guys like him too, who won't put some people in jail who are poisoning their communities.
Right. Yeah. And I've always wondered, and I know you do too, we wonder if something happened to his daughter, his grandson, what would his tune be then?
Oh, you know what it would be. We all know what it would be.
Of course. Right. Hang him. Hang him.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, when our governor, I don't know if you follow California politics, but when our governor leads the way on some of this horse shit, it's
horrible.
But we are seeing, for instance, we just had Assemblyman Jim Patterson. We are seeing the shift now because community is asking for it. Like we've gotten fed up of the lack of public safety.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be the rally around the BS of defund the police and these different things. And, and I get why some people started thinking in that direction per se, but it just ended up being this snowball thing that sounded really good. And, this is the nice rhetoric. And this is where we've ended up. Right. And none of them are ever going to go, boy, we were wrong. Since 2020, 300,000 plus Americans have died. Right. We blew it on public safety. But the tide's starting to shift. We are seeing it. A
little bit.
Yeah, well, people want to raise their kids in safety. They want their kids to be able to go to school without getting their backside kicked. You don't want to worry about having to walk to the grocery store and stand there while somebody walks out with bags full of stuff they didn't pay for while you're there with money in your hand to pay for whatever you're buying. Folks have had it. But I think one of the things that I think drove this was there was a lot of discussion about too many people of color being incarcerated. Mm-hmm. And that's an unfortunate circumstance, no doubt about that. But I don't think, look, my time in law enforcement, we never went to go arrest people of color. We went and dealt with conduct. And it's unfortunate that a lot of that conduct happened in neighborhoods that were impoverished, and primarily occupied by people of color. But the thing is, the victims of those crimes were most often people of color. You know what I mean? So yes, I get it. You don't want to incarcerate people of color, but at the same time, by not enforcing the law, now more people of color are being victimized. So I mean, it's really just such a delicate balance that folks don't recognize. And they, when they say that policing is racial or somehow it's a inherently racist profession, I just strongly disagree. I mean, look, all the medals I got as a cop, more of them were from saving people than putting people in jail. And the reason I got medals for it was I put my life in jeopardy doing it. And again, this was for people of color. I didn't look at the color of their skin when I went to save them. I didn't look at the color of their skin when I was arresting them. It was based on, behavior. It was always behavior driven. So it's unfortunate, but I think the pendulum is starting to swing. But here's the thing, man. Like, look, use of force as a police officer is something you never want to do because you get hurt too. I hate to say it. We're not made of steel, right? But it's not pretty. It's not. I mean, even they call it necessary force. You don't want to use it, but sometimes you have to use it, and it's not pretty. But that's to maintain order. Sometimes you have to use it. Restoring order when bedlam has kind of begun is often far uglier than maintaining order. And I think folks are going to be in for a surprise, like when some of these really violent parts of town have to be brought back under control. It's not going to be a pretty thing, but really it's the politicians that caused it by basically forcing the police to stop doing their job in some communities. So
Right.
You know?
No, I remember I was a paramedic years and years and years ago. And the last thing we ever looked at was the color of somebody's skin. If somebody was shot through the chest, what do you think I gave two shits? Okay. If somebody was black, white, brown, green, whatever. No, we didn't have time to we didn't even have time to look at faces, at their face.
Right.
Right. I mean, again, full blown out emergency, man. We're doing everything we can to save that person's life. We didn't care who the hell it was. I mean, so a lot of this stuff, but it almost seems as you were talking, I'm sitting there going, I'm 68 years old and I'm sitting there thinking as you're saying that, it's like it was like all of a sudden I'm thinking, how the hell did we get here? How the hell did we it seems like it just was overnight, that we're just kind of marching along and doing our thing. And then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose from all sides.
Well, it's the politicians. Look, they gave up, it was all for narratives, because they wanted votes to go in one direction or another. But I'll tell you, I grew up in a neighborhood that was primarily African-American. The house, the building across the street from where I live was a housing project. My wife is half Hispanic, half Black. And, and some of our friends are African-American, some are Hispanic, but I have some really good friends who we just went out the other day, and, one of them we had a discussion. It was kind of an uncomfortable discussion. He's African-American, and he said to me, he goes, Peter, what I don't like? And I was like, nah, what's up? He's like, I remember there was a time when I was a kid where if I was walking down the street and, white people and even some Black people would see me, they would cross the street. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sucks. He's like, well, that went away. And I was, yeah. He goes, no, but now it's back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think about it. We have become racially divided now more than we were
ever.
5 years ago, 10 years ago. Yeah, maybe ever, but certainly more than we were. And you wonder, like, what happened? Because we were getting along. Now all of a sudden there's all this animosity. And if you really look at it, a lot of it came from politicians.
You bet.
They're the ones who were spewing this, and some folks listen. Other people just say, hey, I'm not changing. I'm going to be who I was. And that's why I think people still primarily get along in most places. But, there are some folks who they look, leadership starts at the top, right? And there are some folks who listen to what folks say and they let it influence them. I'm not going to let it influence me, because I just decided it ain't worth listening to them. but there's some folks who do, and that's sad. We're voting for the wrong people in a lot of parts of the country. That's for sure.
Well, boy, you couldn't have said that one any better.
Oh yeah, and we're definitely seeing it like all the time. I don't forever on the news. We have a racism issue, and I went outside and went through the town I live in and went, bullshit. I don't see any of that.
Right.
And I think people, they just hear it or they read it and be, oh, that's what it is. No, go out in the world, interact with people. Like,
right.
It'll tell you otherwise, And one of the other big frustrating things for me, us is seeing that is the limitations on law enforcement for interdiction, because there used to be multitudes of people we know that they will state what saved their life as an addict was that arresting officer. And 99% of them maintained a relationship with that officer in sobriety.
Well, I'll tell you, you bring up a great point, and I'll say two things. Well, a couple things, actually. One is, like you talk about New York, stop and frisk, right? It was bad. You know what? Look, first off, stop and frisk is a narrative. That's not what we did. It was stop, question, and frisk. And that came about if you saw something suspicious, you engaged a person in a conversation. Right? If you thought they were armed, you would frisk them. But you asked them questions. Hey, what are you doing here? Oh, I'm visiting a friend. Okay, where's your friend? Oh, they live in apartment, 2B. What's their name? Stuff like that. But the question got left out. That was what cops did, since the dawn of time. So they demonized that. That's the problem. But the other thing is, cops are afraid now because no one goes to jail, because the DAs have gotten soft in a lot of places, but they'll prosecute a cop. So cops
in a heartbeat.
Yeah. So cops don't want to go out there and do the job because they're afraid they're going to get jammed up. So they kind of do this, they put the blinders on and they don't see things. So yeah, to your point, that is costing people's lives. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate because, again, going back to what I said earlier, the people in those communities want to be safe. And when the cops aren't going out there stopping people who they believe are selling drugs or carrying a gun, maybe because they're going to go out there and do some sort of a robbery or something, people get hurt. But yeah, it's happening. Look, I talked to some of the cops and they're like, why am I going to do it now? Why am I going to bother? The city doesn't have my back. The politicians don't have my back.
Right.
So that's, again, it's public safety is taking a hit because of that sort of behavior.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, please call PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, at 559-579-1551, or visit us online at painnonprofit.org. Follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Pain Nonprofit. And please subscribe to the Don't Hide the Scars podcast and share with others wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. And if you would like to donate to PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, please click the link in the description to make your tax-deductible donation today and help us save more lives gripped by addiction.
Again, you guys are saying stuff that's just kind of taken my memory, back. and I remember as a kid, I think this was like 63. I had this friend of mine, he was African-American kid and he lived on the other side of town, right? And I lived in a particular part of town, and he'd come over to my house and we, we'd play in the neighborhood, and him and I didn't give a damn what color was what. We didn't even see color, right? And you'd have some people in my neighborhood get kind of going, ooh, who's that kid, walking down the street. But when I went to his neighborhood, because I'd spend the night at his house, hang out with his family. There were people in his neighborhoods going, oh, who's that kid? Okay. And they're talking about my ass. Okay. Right. So people aren't really different from one another. No. I mean, it's the people that start this crap, okay, that are to blame in my opinion. It just is.
And I think too with that is there's nothing wrong with questioning a different element. Like, I've not seen that person before. I've had new people move into the neighborhood that I live in. It's a gated community. You know what I do? I go out and introduce myself. Oh, new to the neighborhood? Nice to meet you. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So we've taken these things and I don't know. They have been politicized and used, and it's sad. I was just in San Francisco on May 4th, Star Wars event with one of my best friends. And it's interesting because when we're leaving, he's like, hey, because we had to cross the Tenderloin. I don't remember if I told you this. If you're uncomfortable, there's walking groups now. And I'm like, what's that? And he goes, yeah, they get like 15 or more people and people stay. I'm like, you do remember what I do for a living, right? I said, I just feel bad I didn't bring Narcan. But the sad part is this beautiful city that I used to live in, San Francisco, is dying because of this.
Yeah.
Because it's not safe. Every business on Market Street, Flindt,
gone.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, look, I mean, I go back to New York from time to time. I speak at the 9/11 Memorial Museum, about that day and some stuff I went through afterward. And New York was a bad place in the 80s. Like if you went to Times Square, you couldn't walk very far without getting solicited because somebody wanted to sell you a fake ID. That's where you went for fake IDs. Right. I'm not going to lie and say I never had one. So fake IDs, they sold drugs openly there, and there were peep shows, sex shows.
Oh yeah.
So and then the Giuliani era came, and it was zero tolerance and broken windows policing that Bill Bratton brought that I think was amazing. And then it turned into Pokemon store and Disney stores and Hard Rock Cafe. So Times Square turned around and you felt safe going there. It was like, wow, it's like a tourist place again. Now it's almost back to where it was because of what's happened in New York. So San Francisco is not the only city where they've abandoned the concept of public safety and let the inmates take over the asylum, so to speak. I mean, it's bad. Like 35 years in law enforcement, I didn't feel safe walking through Times Square. Yeah. So if I didn't feel safe, and I patrolled the Bronx, for God's sakes, back in the 80s, imagine some poor family that came from somewhere else in the country that just, Times Square, the crossroads of the world, let's go see it. And now you got somebody shooting up on the curb. You have another person literally dropped his pants and took a crap right against the building. And I was like, there were people dancing with no clothes on. I'm like, this isn't what it was. Right. It's sad.
Yeah, no, I remember I was in New York in the 80s, and I guess is it Washington Park or Washington Square?
Washington Square Park. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I would walk through there, and I mean there were drug dealers that would be walking towards me and out loud going, just basically saying it, cocaine, heroin, what, this, that, the other thing. I mean, I was there a number of times in the early 80s. Yeah, and it was and New York happens to be one of my favorite cities in the entire world. And right now, I wouldn't go back.
Yeah,
I just wouldn't go back there for right now. But it's all over the country, and it's a shame. And we're in this. Peter, I just don't know if we're going to be able to pull ourselves out of this. And what I mean by that is this generation of now of 20-year-olds. That's the generation I'm talking about. Because most of these kids are using some sort of drug somewhere. Not all. I'm never going to say that, because not all kids do drugs. I don't want to get any more letters than I already get. But there is a huge portion of kids out there doing it. And what scares me more than almost anything else is, according to our stats, DEA stats, 60% of cocaine now is laced with fentanyl. And it's that casual user again, I'm not promoting any of this, but it's that casual user on a Friday or Saturday night that they want to go out and they want to take a couple bumps, all right, and go dancing somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, could you imagine when Studio 54 was rolling, right? And if 60% of the cocaine was laced with fentanyl then?
No, I couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine.
Right.
But I mean, look at the demographics that it's affecting. I don't know, and you guys seem to follow this. I don't know if you're following it nationally. Recently, there's some students from West Point.
Of course, they died. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just something that I think a lot of people, folks who aren't educated in this, they have this perception that people who use drugs are, from the dregs of society, which we know that that's not true.
Right.
It affects all different walks of life.
Nine-
Doctors, lawyers,
all of them.
Yeah.
90% of our clientele that have walked through these doors over the last 10 years have all come from high schools in higher socioeconomic areas. These kids all have parents, again, parents that aren't divorced. They're professionals. They go to these amazing high schools. And that is a fact. I mean, we've got the records to prove it. But since fentanyl has now made its way in here, it's affecting every socioeconomic group out there, just not the high end. But when you remember the Purdue Pharma mess and OxyContin and during that era, most of these kids were, again, from those areas that were doing those drugs as well.
Yeah. It's sad. It's frightening. And look, like you, I wonder about our future. Like at what point do we pull out of this nosedive? And the politicians are not helping. The people who we're electing, are, in my opinion, are pushing the wheel forward when they should be pulling it back. And it's all to get votes. And that's disgusting. I mean, look, I remember when I was a kid that Republicans, Democrats got along to some degree. They disagreed. They drank together. I mean, I remember people on different sides of the aisle being friends. It seems now that's taboo.
Right.
And unless we get back to being able to have discussions, we're doomed. We're doomed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's I mean, how we started with talking about the Chinese, China and their plan. I mean, I had people calling me forever, Peter. You're just a conspiracy theorist. I'm like, really? So we got locked down. Our government agreed. Not only that, took away our civil rights, implemented it forever, and then put, there was the fear campaign, and then all this other stuff to follow. It's how do you destabilize a civilization? Well, build discourse first and foremost, economic destabilization, and let's inject it with some things that's really going to get that the population down. All those things happen.
Yeah, and plus they flew a spy balloon across our entire country.
Right.
No, it's crazy. I mean, look, if you told me this 10 years ago, I would have said you're crazy. But look, it's happening, and no one seems to be doing anything about it.
No. And you said something about history and about the Chinese back in the 1800s with heroin. It was the British that got China hooked on that. But look how China got rid of that problem. They killed every drug. They killed everybody, basically every addict, every drug dealer. Okay. Seriously, they wiped out a generation right there of users. They got rid of I'm not promoting that, for God's sake. If anybody's listening to this thing, Jesus. Okay. But they did, and they haven't forgotten.
No,
right? They don't forget.
Well, here's the thing. As we know, TikTok, for example, right?
Oh God,
the stuff that we can access here, they can't do there. They use TikTok for educational purposes, legitimate educational purposes. Then you look at the vaping products, right? I learned this very recently. The vaping products that are sold on the streets here are not allowed for sale in China.
Right.
So, I mean, but they'll send it here. And that's the thing that scares me, is like they've started to poison our pills. Right? They send vaping products over here in mass, right? They also send counterfeit tobacco products here, which they're not prevalent now, but the government's talking about a nicotine ban, a menthol ban. Believe me, the Chinese would be very happy to fill that void. But you wonder, what would they put in these products? And think about this. If you pop a pill, it can kill you. We know that. We've seen it.
Right.
What if you light up a cigarette that's laced with something in a car with 2 or 3 of your friends? Just the things that could potentially happen that we don't seem to be protecting ourselves from is really very alarming. And, again, back to what I said earlier, until our politicians get their heads out of their backsides and start putting the country before their party, we're in a bad spot.
You bet.
Yeah. And people, I think, us as the citizens, and I'm seeing it. I'm seeing less people wanting to listen to the BS, but need to understand that too. Like, I had friends 6 years ago going, "What do you mean he wants to be into this? This president guy wants to be independent of China and their stuff when we can do it ourselves." Well, now they're like, "Boy, that seemed like a really good idea." It's like, I don't know what to tell you, but as long as we keep buying in the rhetoric, we're just going to keep, I don't know. What's its data this year? What do you think for 2023? We haven't gotten the numbers yet, but I'm guessing 140,000, 130,000 overdose deaths.
It's got to be pushing at least 130,000 range. And for 2023, the numbers aren't out yet. There were numbers out for overdoses in our county, in Fresno County, and we are down in overdose deaths, but the emergency room visits numbers have risen because people are still addicts and people are still going in, because we're not talking about the people that go in for an overdose and live.
Right. Well, that's like the shooting statistics, right? Well, not as many people are dying. Well, that's because of advances in what people are doing on ambulances. Like now they inject quick clot and things like that. So it's the medical advances that are keeping people alive. Right. It's not abstinence from substances or people not shooting each other.
Right.
So, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. It is. So in your area, is your law enforcement, are they engaged in things like Narcan training, going to the community, talking to kids, talking to the general public about this?
Yeah, I live in Fairfax County, Virginia. It's relatively liberal here, but the police are pretty squared away. And yeah, they have very good outreach. They have very good victim services people here. So, I mean, they do interface with the community a lot. They're very service oriented. The problem that we have is the same problem that they have in many other parts of the country too. The police do their job, but once things make it to the prosecution stage, they fall apart because we have a prosecutor here who's very soft on crime.
Right.
Right. He's another Soros-funded prosecutor who's all about, just social justice more so than actual justice, which I don't get. But
do you see a decrease in men and women that want to become officers because of all this
absolutely
current stuff?
Yeah, the police department's here understaffed. I'll tell you, I was talking to somebody the other day. I took the test to be a New York City police officer back in 1984. I started with the police department in 1987. So I took the test with 60,000 people.
Wow.
60,000 people wanted to be New York City cops during that time. That's just one test. Now they struggle to get 2,500 people to take that test.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Even with the
Yeah.
increases in salaries, and I mean, because I know they're doing that, they're paying more or trying to pay more. I think.
Yeah. Well,
you know,
I
in
mean,
some
here
areas.
in Washington, D.C., they were offering $30,000 sign-on bonuses, and they were struggling to bring in people. Because, you know, this, going back to what we were talking about, this whole show pretty much, is they've demonized the profession. I mean, look, I worked in law enforcement. There were a couple of bad apples. Most of the folks I worked with were the salt of the earth. I mean, some amazing people. So, look, the values that I think I have today, you know, why I blew the whistle on Fast and Furious, why I helped get some innocent people out of prison, this was learned behavior that I learned from people who taught me the job and taught me the culture of the profession. So, I mean, when people demonize law enforcement, it really upsets me because they clearly don't know the people in law enforcement. And what they do is they latch on to, you know, a segment of body cam video that does not portray the actual event, or the few instances where something really bad did happen. Like I remember there was a shooting where a cop shot a former Coast Guard seaman in a car stop, shot the guy in the back. I remember it was captured. He went to prison. The cop went to prison. It was the most horrific police shooting I've ever seen because the cop was clearly in the wrong, but justice prevailed. The cop went to prison. So, but I think people, they latch on to these events. Look at the George Floyd thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
George, I mean, his autopsy results, for example, I was a homicide detective for 5 years in New York. Cause of death matters. His autopsy results, the cause of death wasn't even death by the hands of another. It wasn't even murder. It was because of heart defect and fentanyl.
Yeah.
And cops are in prison for murder. And I'm not saying those cops were right in what they did. They weren't. But I mean, it certainly didn't justify in normal circumstances a murder conviction. But look what that incident did to the country.
Well, let me just add a little caveat to the George Floyd thing, all right? Because what I heard, what I researched in that was when just speak. Okay, I got to say this right. Yes, he had fentanyl in his system, but just because he didn't have enough fentanyl in his system is the problem. Because when you're starting to go through withdrawal symptoms, trust me, I've done it. I've been there. All right. We turn violent. We turn angry. We're going to fight back at any little drop of a hat somewhere. So he was more than likely going through withdrawal symptoms at the same time because the fentanyl is going to stay in your system for a while, even though it's not giving you that high right at the moment. So I think those officers had every right to detain him in any way, shape, or form that they could. Again, as a paramedic way back when, it was like, you remember the PCP days, you know, right? When somebody was on PCP, try tackling those guys. All right. Yeah. I mean, it took the Third Army to get one person down. You know,
and it could have been a 114-pound female.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, good Lord.
We could go on this one forever, man. This is crazy.
I don't want to end without asking you, you know, you've brought up your values multiple times. When was that decision that it was, I mean, you've been labeled a whistleblower, but I just say someone that needed the truth out there.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was when I got out to Phoenix, I saw things were being done very, very differently than from New York. And I wasn't arrogant enough to think that when I first got out there that, all right, I'm going to fix this problem, because I realized it's, you know, a different part of the country, different culture. U.S. Attorney's Office had different policies. But what was going on is, you know, we were trying to stop guns from going to Mexico. We were seizing the guns. No one was going to jail. I mean, most of the cases were declined for prosecution. But then what happened was, you know, an agent in the Phoenix Group 7, which was the Fast and Furious group. So, I mean, you know, they were letting guns walk in that group. We didn't know about it in the other groups. But one of the agents in that group blew the whistle to Senator Grassley about guns walking. So I was at a meeting with the Phoenix, the other supervisors in Phoenix and my boss's boss. And word got out that John Dodson had blown the whistle. And rumors were that the U.S. Attorney's Office was contemplating indicting John. So I was like, wait a minute, all of these cases that we referred for prosecution that they wouldn't prosecute, you know, people smuggling guns to cartels, bodies piling up in Mexico, you know, some of the guns, you know, were being used in some pretty horrific shootings. The ones that we weren't able to interdict because they were, you know, they were purchased before we found out that they were straw purchase. So that was the bridge too far for me. Like, wait a minute, all of these cases that we brought against criminals who were supplying guns to the cartels, prosecutors wouldn't prosecute them, but they're going to prosecute an ATF agent who blew the whistle and is telling the truth. Yeah. And that's the point where I had a conversation with my wife and said, hey, man, I don't feel good with this. And I think I need to contact some folks. And she's like, well, if you don't contact them, you're not the man I married. So lo and behold, that was when I called Grassley's office myself and said, hey, man, I know that Eric Holder and ATF are telling you that ATF doesn't walk guns in that group. They're walking guns. John's not a liar. Let's have a conversation. Give me a subpoena. And they did. So, I mean, but look, I learned that from years and years of working with honest cops. I mean, you do the right thing. Look, even when it's not the easy thing, and that certainly wasn't, led to 4 years of me being investigated and, me fighting to clear my name. And in the end, I did. But it was the right thing to do,
Sure. Yeah. Sure. It's, you know what, Peter, it's tough doing the right thing sometimes, but there's men like you and hopefully there's men like us and other people out there, that do the right thing, and we're going to continue to do the right thing. And look, doing the right thing's not easy, but I sleep pretty good at night. And telling the truth is something that I'm going to continue to do. And I think I know we do it because we care. Okay. We do it because we care. I'm certain nobody's certainly getting rich off any of this crap. Okay. I mean, so I like sleeping at night, and sure. if we can save one more person by telling the truth, then so be it. That's how I look at it.
Well, I have a thing that I always tell young agents, and it's something that was beaten into my head by some old. Look, when I started as a cop, I worked with guys who were around in the Serpico days. Yeah, back then, cops stuck around for 30 years, 35 years. But they used to say, and it's something I strongly believe in, is the only thing you take to the grave with you is your reputation. Yeah. So how you treat people and how you conduct yourself, that stays with you. Once you're gone, all the other stuff, you don't take it with you. So I think it's just so important to just be true, and look, I've made a lot of friends because I'm honest about things, and I've made some enemies because I'm not going to lie to people and say something's great and peachy when it's not. Right. I'm not that combative guy that's going to be disrespectful about it, but I think that we have a duty to be honest.
You bet.
Because, honesty matters.
Yes,
absolutely,
sir.
It does.
Yes, sir. Well, the book is The Deadly Path, How Operation Fast and Furious and Bad Lawyers Armed Mexican Cartels. Great read. The link is in the podcast description. And I mean, in it, you also talk about being there in 9/11 and, just wow. Can't imagine. And thank you. And I know that caused some serious health cancer. And you only, the right lung or left lung you still have?
The right lung is gone. I was fortunate, all the cancer went with it, so I didn't have to go through radiation or chemo. So I mean, I got off easy. So look, God was looking down on me, that day that I managed to survive, and then later on when the cancer came, could have been worse, man. And here's the funny thing is, my wife gave me bronchitis. And that's how I found out I had cancer. I didn't have any symptoms. So if she didn't get me sick, I would have spread. I probably would be sitting here talking to you, gentlemen.
No kidding.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Life is weird that way. And
life is weird that way. Yeah.
We'll talk about that often, the things that are blessings that didn't seem so at the time or in the moment.
Right. Yeah. Peter, you're a good man. Man,
thank you.
We appreciate you. We respect you for what you're doing. Keep it up. And I just wish you nothing but the best.
The feeling's mutual. What you guys are doing is heroic. I mean, people need to talk about these things, and then talk honestly about them. So I appreciate the chance to be on the show. And if you ever want to chat again, shoot me an email and we can chat. It was a pleasure.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, please call PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, at 559-579-1551, or visit us online at painnonprofit.org. Follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Pain Nonprofit. And please subscribe to the Don't Hide the Scars podcast and share with others wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. And if you would like to donate to PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, Please click the link in the description to make your tax-deductible donation today and help us save more lives gripped by addiction.